Okay, today's video we're going to talk about AMP, how AMP pages can improve your PPC campaigns and actually make more money with your PPC campaigns. I'll explain how you do that. And how it's basically not going to make you money. If you're in certain situations, you might be thinking that AMP will help you and are ultimately deciding if you should actually spend the time to set AMP up or not. I'll tell you pretty much where it's useful, where you're wasting your time, and where it is useful and actually for sure definitely will get you an increase in profitability from your PPC campaigns. Whether that's Google, actually, or whether that's Facebook ads, whether that's anywhere else. Given usually people think about AMP but talking about Google, it actually has use for you to actually get any other traffic source, any other PPC sources of PPC campaigns that you're running also to work better for your company as well. Respectively, most people think about AMP when they're doing organic. They don't think about it from the PPC side. So I am going to just spend some time talking about it from the PPC side for the few people that are looking for a video about PPC and AMP, hopefully answer all your questions that you had about it, and you ultimately get to the point where you decide for sure if you want to do it or not based upon where it's useful, as I found on clients' campaigns where we've tried it and where it wasn't. So anyway, with all that said, we'll get into it. One thing Google, as well as everyone always promotes about AMP, is how fast it loads. And it loads pretty darn fast, let me tell you. Really fast, like under a second fast. Not every time, but a lot of times. But how does this translate into more money, actually? Okay? So, let's just start with the cons to this. The biggest and the main con is of using AMP, given that there is potential for return there, and particularly can make the website load faster, is the programmability. There's certain kinds of JavaScript that you can be able to use, for instance, on it, and certain kinds that you can't. Respectively, if you have an entire, you built your website as it is, you're trying to use, let's say, a certain page of your website for a landing page, and you want to make that page into AMP. All the stuff that you had on your design originally may not be able to be used. Maybe it will if you have a simple site, maybe it won't. So that's something to consider right off the bat to see if you want to do what you're doing or not. A lot of times you can't strip everything out and get some of the key functionality, like something that will arrange your testimonials, for instance, really well on your page. You have to weigh that out for yourself right off the bat, even if it will potentially give you the plus side of running the AMP, which I'm covering here on this video as well. Of course, and not just because the website's stripped down, but the website gets much, much faster, from what I've seen, 3 to 10 times faster on AMP. And the way that actually works, if you're not sure about that already, is not because you're stripping the site down and you're getting down to the brass tacks of what that page should be and just using plain HTML, not fancy scripting on it. AMP a lot of times doesn't work, will cooperate with or allow, is the caching. So basically, Google takes your website, puts it on their web server, and when somebody goes to your PPC ad and clicks on it, you're directing people to a website that's essentially on Google's web server, no longer on your web server that you had for the rest of your website. And so what it does is a couple things there. Websites that are loaded into cache generally will load faster than if it's not into cache. In terms of physical resources on a web server and where a website can be pulled from. The same thing goes, of course, as a lot of you guys have probably heard about, if you have we're not talking about AMP here, we're talking about your regular website. If you have caching, like say if you're doing WordPress, you have a caching plugin, the same thing. You could load your website physically into the cache on the web server or a virtual private server or what have you, that you're renting space on some web server out there from a web hosting company, it will actually load faster. And the main thing with caching is, when it comes to that is if you download one, so it'll download all the resources. So when you, basically when you get, even a little bit, well, I don't want to I'm not a networking expert here, even though I went to college for that. I don't want to explain the pros and cons of the caching as far as websites are getting outside the track of what we're doing here. But it puts it into a part of the, it pulls the files, pre-pulls the files essentially. And so when you go to get the files, they're already into the part of the memory that's basically closer to you than where it normally sits on the hard drive. So, but it isn't just that as well. And when you're talking about AMP here again, Google's got web servers all over the place. So if you have a web server that you're pulling, you're going to a website there, and that company's website is on a web server that's physically closer to you, you can load the site faster because it has less distance to physically travel. And that doesn't, you're talking about speed of light and the electricity, how that all works, but still it matters when you're talking about 1,000 miles, okay? It does matter to the point where it can load a second slower. If you're talking about pulling a website from, that if you're in Boston and you're downloading a website where the web server's in DC versus Seattle. That's about what it is. And when if you go, across the ocean, you're downloading a website from Australia, it'll take 4 seconds faster. So I don't know what the exact ratio is, but 1,000 miles per second is probably somewhat. Maybe that's probably not enough. I don't know what the distance is between here and Seattle, but if that's about how long it takes to add a second to your download speed. So anyway, Google's got all these resources, have all these web servers, and you get to basically get free space on their web server by using AMP. They will route the person. You'll basically get routed to when you go to download the website. It'll route the person. There'll be a whole list of web servers you can get the website on now, and it'll find the closest one. And you'll get it from the closest one first. Therefore, it will download faster. Okay. On top of that, Google has enough resources where they can use solid-state hard drive instead of a magnetic hard drive for their web hosting. And if you don't know it, it's just like on your computer files you can download them faster if you're using a solid-state hard drive. They're accessible faster. That's just how it is. Well, Google's going to use solid-state hard drives for everything, basically. And therefore, another reason why it's going to load faster, if you don't have that already, that is. So, and I'm sure there's some other things, but that gives you some ideas of why it's faster and why you would necessarily want to use, why Google would actually be faster for you physically, how it works. Landing pages are a way to get the best of both worlds here. So in other words, most people don't want to use AMP, but we'll just say, or I don't know what the percentages are, but quite a few people don't want to use AMP because their websites do have advanced programming on it. And so they don't want to have to strip down their whole website just so they can use AMP. Well, with PPC, you can have dedicated pages just for your PPC campaign. So you could literally take a page that you have, you could put it on and strip it down so that it will be compatible for AMP and just use that landing page for just the PPC campaigns. So respectively, and where that would be useful is like, let's say your website normally needs to have all these bells and whistles, but for what they need to get what they need to contact you for a PPC lead, they don't need all of that. So you can take it off, and then with that you'll get the speed increase from AMP, and so therefore again you're getting the best of both worlds there potentially. So anyway, with that all said and out of the way, if your website loads slow in the first place, you will be able to get help with your sales using AMP, both desktop and mobile. So here's something also that people don't talk about when it comes to AMP. AMP, when it first came out, was about making mobile sites faster. Why? Because mobile networks were considerably slower, 10 10 years ago, let's say, I don't know how long ago AMP came out, 5 to 10 years ago, because a lot of the different cities were still on 3G. And if you're in advertising in another country outside the US, or, I won't say first world, third world, whatever. If you're on a lot of the network is still on 3G, AMP is still even more helpful in that case, because it's on a slower network. 4G is the actual download speed is 14 megabits per second. So respectively, it's fast enough now that even if you didn't have the whole AMP AMP going for your so-called mobile users or mobile site, you'll probably get by just fine, as long as you're using quality hosting. I always have mentioned on my other videos that you want a virtual private server, whether it's overkill or not. I have clients that I work with, that their IT people say, oh, it's overkill. You don't need a virtual private server. Well, when you get on a shared hosting account that costs $10 a month, they ram you on there with like 50,000 people, and the website loads slow because it's sharing too many resources. If I'm going to be spending 10 grand a month on my ads, I don't want to be hoping that there isn't too many people from all the other sites on my web hosting trying to access their sites at the same time as mine. And then the load time goes from 3 seconds to 5 seconds, because I'm going to lose a crap ton of money when that happens. And it may happen sometimes, it may be not happening, and others very unreliable. I want something rock solid. Everything I do with the landing pages and the hosting, I want to be unaffected by anything, because I'm optimizing my ads, and I got to be able to know everything on this website is consistent, so that if I do testing on the front end for the traffic, I know what to shut off and what to turn on, and at what degree it should be turned on, and all that. You got to have that clarity on the the landing page side to make good solid adjustments on the ad side. But respectively, if you don't, so I always do VPS. Yes, it's going to be $50 to $100 a month. It's worth it. There's not a single time where it's not worth it. You can argue with me all you want on that. I want a solid state hard drive. If you're using a different like a web hosting, like a all-in-one solution like Wix or Squarespace or Shopify or whatever you're using, even if you're using like ClickFunnels, usually what you're getting on the better ones, that is hosting there where they are using all those different things, the VPS with the proper resources and the solid state hard drive and all that. And with that, then the website will load fast. So basically you won't need as much of a help getting with the AMP, your website already probably loads fast, and that's partly what you're getting with that. But not with the lower price ones, the off-name ones. It can actually load slow enough, and now AMP can help you. But respectively, AMP, going back to what I was saying before, was supposed to be just for mobile sites. Now it's actually, you can use the properties of what AMP provides you, i.e. all the things that, basically it's like getting an upgrade on your web hosting to make your website load faster for all the stuff, all the bottlenecks on the hardware side, as well as how far away you are from the server, like I mentioned, physically. And you can make the mobile and the desktop site that you have load faster. And that could be, of course, for what we're talking about here, PPC campaigns, but anything else you're doing. So AMP can be used for desktop and mobile to get more money on both. Not just having to, you don't have to think about just mobile. You can actually, while you're at it, send all your desktop traffic there. When you're talking about PPC campaigns, if you're going to do one, you might as well do the other. If your overall hosting you were starting with was, the website was loading slower than like 3 seconds. And that's about what the number is, where the breakoff, the point in which the AMP is going to start being useful for you. Whereas if you can load faster than that, it won't. Actually, the number is about 2.5 seconds. Specifically, you could find these studies all over. I pulled these numbers off skilled.co. That if your website loads faster than 2.4 seconds, okay, you're gonna assuming that, and this is a study off of their site, basically under 2.4 seconds, it didn't matter if it was 1 second or 2 or 2.4, the website that they had in the study was showing a 1.9% conversion rate to a sale or to a lead, whatever you want to say. Respective, and actually I think that was an e-commerce study, to be clear, to a sale, so actual sale. But whether you're doing lead generation or e-commerce, the same spread, roughly speaking, is going to apply in terms of your website loading this. This is how much you plan on getting in terms of a cut and conversion rate and so forth, like I'm going to describe here. If the website in that particular study went from 2.4 seconds to loading in 3.3 seconds, now, instead of getting a 1.9% conversion rate, they were getting a 1.5% conversion rate, which is a 21% drop or reduction in the amount of people that they were getting from the same traffic, or conversion rates, okay? So a lot of websites don't load in 2.4 seconds. It's getting to be more, but I'd say half don't load in 2.4 seconds. So you can go and just type in website speed tester and find out for yourself. I'm sure you probably thought about this before, but go ahead and do it. Not only do it, but test. I like Pingdom. You can Google website speed test Pingdom, because you could use different servers. And going back to what I said before about how far the web server is away from you, you can determine if what the load speed will be, and you can try downloading the website from different physical locations so you can see what the load speed will be. Because maybe the load speed is 2.4 seconds where you're at, but if you do from the other side of the country, now it's 3.3 seconds. Now, you'll say half of your traffic, basically, if you had an even spread of where people are from when they click on your ads, is getting a 21% drop, which would then overall result in, if you follow me here, 11% drop in your conversion rate, just because of your hosting and what you're using and the limitations with your hosting and not having the best hosting that you can. But it goes further here. The slower it is, the more customers you're going to lose. It's all about user expectations. As websites get faster, people are expecting more, just like with shipping times, people are expecting faster and faster shipping times. Respectively, for the first 2.4 seconds, people are fine and they expect to kind of wait 2.4 seconds because most websites aren't going to be able to load in a second. But what the study shows is once you get to 3 seconds, some of the people at least, basically 20%, 3.3 seconds to be specific, 20% had the expectation that it should have loaded already, and given that there's 10 other listings on Google or whatever to click on, for them it was easier to go back than to wait the extra 0.9 seconds from 2.4 to 3.3 seconds. If you're running Facebook ads or anything else, the same principles apply. Even if you had a great product there, they're only going to wait so long. People's attention span is like a goldfish or a fly or whatever we want to say there. If what you have is a more compelling offer, definitely they're going to be waiting, be more patient. But you can't, just assuming that you have a good offer is really an idiotic thing. You should it's not that expensive, not that hard to do to get your hosting to be and your load speeds to be good for everybody. Especially when you have AMP, technically. If you have zero money right now, you could just use AMP. Obviously, it takes time and effort and maybe money to get your website set up for AMP, potentially, but you get my point. If you go to 4.2 seconds, so from the website loading at 2.4 seconds, if it's instead loaded at 4.2 seconds, now the conversion rate is a 0.9% from an original 1.9%. Okay? So that's a 53% drop from the original conversion rate that was generated with a 2.4 second lead time or load time. Going a step further, it just keeps getting worse. If your website loaded in this particular study at 5.7 seconds, instead of 2.4 seconds, your conversion rate's now 0.6%. which is a 68% drop. Okay, so respectively, this keeps going, and you can find similar studies all over the place where this data lines up, where you could say load times affect website speed, or load times effect on conversion rates. So this is heavily documented. So you can see here, you're going to be losing people more and more the slower it is, and basically starting at 2.4 seconds. Now, I mentioned before with AMP will actually load your website in under a second. It's that fast. I've seen it myself. But that only has some marginal utility to you when your website loads in 2.4 seconds. You can see by the study here and by other similar studies where they have similar numbers that they show. The expectations, they'll put up with so much, but once it goes over that, you start losing people the longer they have to wait. As a side, by the way, this same thing applies for how long they have to wait to talk to somebody when they call, and how long they have to wait to talk to somebody after they fill out a contact form. And I have a video about that I made about 5 videos ago. It's all tied in together. But so long story short, you can use AMP as a free way to improve the load speed of your website on both desktop and mobile to get you under 2.4 seconds. Or you can spend the $100 a month to have a VPS server set up and get that 2.4 seconds. But even with the virtual private server, like I said, that we use on our guaranteeppc.com site, and I recommend to all of our clients right off the bat, if they're going to spend all this big money on ads, you might as well have the best hosting. There's not a time where that doesn't make sense. I don't care how small your budget is, because you can see the difference in the numbers here. AMP still has a distinct advantage on top of the ball-to-the-wall hosting, if you will, specifically because, going back to what I was explaining to you earlier, that the AMP puts your website not just on one web server, now it's on multiple web servers, okay? And it's distributed all over the country and actually distributed all over the world, okay? So, respectively, your load speed is going to be much faster across the board. You can, and regardless of where you're at. So one thing I noticed is if you've got a point, like let's say you have I had a client where I did this recently that I have a case study that I'm going to talk about here. If you have a 0.7 second load speed on AMP, okay, and that's in the US, and you're from the US downloading the website, the load speed over in the UK will be like 2 seconds. So it's not going to be 0.6. So my understanding of all this is basically, and again, there's a way with like a service like Pingdom where you can look like you're from the UK and download the website as if you were there. For some reason, you can't get the 0.6 seconds load speed in the UK, but still, if you were using regular hosting, that load speed would be like 5 seconds, way over this 2.4 second threshold that you want to keep under, just so that you know. But respectively, maybe, like I said, you're at an average of like 2.7 seconds where you're at, but across the country, on the other side of the country, you're at 3.5. Okay, so having AMP can help you in that situation because you're going to be able to be on multiple servers, and the person who's on the other side of the country, based upon, I believe this is the way that it works, the DNS will show that you can point you to more than one IP address, which is more than one location to pull the files off of. If you guys can help me out with that, the DNS is the right technical term, but basically they'll be able to get to one of multiple servers, one that's closer to them than on the other side of the country, and then you're going to get your load speed up. All I know is the load speed is good pretty much all around the country on AMP. You'll be able to get that 0.6 whether you're on one side of the US or the other side. So, and why that doesn't follow up in the rest of the world, given Google has servers all over, I just think they have less servers overall as you get further out of the country, of the US. So anyway, going to this particular case study, had a client with a load speed of 2.7 seconds, okay? And that was without using AMP. We tried to figure, we did that, we used it on, so this one I knew it was marginal in terms of how it could help us right off the bat, but the client insisted that we used it. We put it all into AMP, we ran the campaigns. What I did was to separate it out, and the way you would do it, if you just want to use AMP for mobile, because you know your mobile load speeds are, you know, like, for instance, if you knew your desktop load speeds are 2.4 seconds, but you know mobile people as a whole be on a little bit slower networks. Maybe not always are they on 4G. In a lot of places of the U.S. still, people don't have 4G still even. You could just use AMP for mobile traffic the way that AMP used to be used, primarily was used, and then you can set up your ads to where in the ad you can have where it says a mobile preferred URL. There's a checkbox for that, and you can send them to the AMP page. Okay. If you wanted to, and respectively, well, I'll just leave it at that. You can use that. If you want to be able to see the stats all by itself, you technically can just go into the device menu and you can see how mobile performs versus desktop there in terms of the conversion rate after that. You're still going to be able to do that. And then you're going to have just the AMP people go to the AMP page, and you would obviously also do that if there's features on your website that aren't compatible with AMP, but you would still like to use, but you don't need AMP for the desktop because the desktop page loads fast enough as is, if you follow me here. So normally it wouldn't hurt you to use AMP for desktop and mobile if you just needed mobile to load faster, in case or unless you go back to where you can't do what you want to do with all the different JavaScript or whatever on your web page. So then you just use AMP for whatever you need to use it for to get your load speed down, and mostly just for the mobile that'll go a little bit slower than desktop, and you're basically close to the 2.4. You want to make sure at least on the mobile people as well, they aren't getting into load speed any slower than 2.4 seconds. But we did it with the load speed on desktop, or just the regular website, I should say, at 2.7 seconds, which the load speed for desktop and mobile will be similar if you're using a responsive website, because it's not two physical websites if you're not understanding that. The responsive websites are programmed to be responsive, most of them, say 90+%, so that if the window, you can drag your window and move it in to like make your actual web browser window smaller, and the website you'll see will respond based upon the size of the window that you have there, and so if that way, there's a bunch of different sizes of tablets and phones, and then that way you have a website that will work for literally any screen size. That's why they call it responsive. So with that, the web files that you have to download are all the same, whether it's on desktop or mobile. But so when you're talking about before AMP or without AMP, 2.7 seconds load time, that's basically what the load time is. And with that, you're checking, like the pingdom, we're using pingdom to download and find out the load speed. Technically, there's some services out there where you can they have a physical mobile device on a mobile network, and they can download it and see what the load speed is. I don't mess with that because it's too much trouble. But the starting out, what Pingdom was showing was 2.7 seconds on this particular client's website. We added through the checkbox, we added a mobile URL on each ad to point people to an AMP version of the landing page. Same exact landing page in every way. It's just was on AMP, and mobile traffic would go to AMP, desktop traffic would go to the desktop page. So there wasn't any drawback in using AMP for everything. We just used AMP for the mobile pages. That's what the particular client wanted. So it was an interesting case study to see what would happen if that would improve our numbers at all in terms of the quality scores that we were getting and the cost per click that we were paying for. With that, the quality scores or CPCs didn't improve at all. The desktop still, converted different than desktop. The mobile, converted different than desktop as it always does, and the cost per click is different than desktop as it always is, but the overall quality score by sending half the people to, or basically the mobile part of the traffic to an AMP page, given the AMP page would load in roughly 0.6 seconds, given that the starting load speed was at 2.7 seconds, it didn't have any effect on the quality scores or the cost per click that we were paying, which is tied to that at all. Normally, if your website was loading slower than 2.4 seconds, hypothetically, because the website loads faster, you're getting a higher conversion rate because of that, your quality scores would go up because quality score, a third of the algorithm is based upon landing page experience score, which sees if every person that comes to your website, they measure and figure out if that person is satisfied. Did they basically convert into a lead or a sale or not, or did they go back and click on something else on Google, which is a failure at that point. And so if your website's loading slow and you're losing more people than if your website loaded a little faster, i.e. 2.4 seconds or faster, then your conversion rates will go up, then your quality score would go up. So not only would you get more of a conversion rate off the bat, you're also going to earn by having a higher quality score, which will drop your cost per click because quality score is directly related to cost per click. In this particular case, the 2.7 second starting load time or starting point that we had, it was not enough to change the quality score in any measurable way that I could see. I've measured the quality scores as a whole and all our keywords before and after, and it was a nil change. So my whole thing behind this is it's just the website there wasn't enough difference here in the load speed between the kind of the psychological breaking or barrier where people their expectations are not being met anymore, i.e. 2.4 seconds, and they start dropping off, to the 2.7 seconds that we started with. If we started out with 3.5 seconds, I 100% believe that we would have got the quality scores higher, dropped the cost per click as a result, and got more conversion rate immediately as soon as it was implemented, because study after study out there is showing you're going to have about a 25% drop with the 3.5 second or 30% drop with a 3.5 second load time versus a 2.4 second or less load time. So hopefully you get my point there. There's another thing to note here. The speed, and I touched on this before, the speed increased on the AMP page that we have both domestically and internationally. So the load speed, on the desktop site was the AMP load speed was about 0.6, 0.7 seconds in the US. The load speed in the UK was 2.1 seconds, Whereas before, the load speed in this 2.7 seconds, this is the load speed in the US. The load speed in UK was 5-something seconds. I can't remember the exact amount, but it was, which is what you're always going to see. The amount of time it takes to load your website overseas when your website's hosted in the US is going to be about double. It can be up to triple depending on where it is. Like if you're in the middle of Asia, I've seen that many times. But so we cut the load speed on the international traffic from 5+ seconds down to 2.1 seconds. That was nice. We didn't have any international campaigns or traffic going, so it didn't help us. And then for the domestic, going from 2.7 basically to 0.7 seconds did not have any measurable change on what we're doing. So what that should be able to tell you is just because you're using AMP and Google likes you to use their products and use their suggestions when they have it, it's still, at the end of the day, it's we want to call it lip service if you want, but it didn't have any measurable impact in our numbers because the website originally just wasn't loading slow enough to get the benefit from AMP in the first place. If I had AMP really could be useful to you guys if you are running international campaigns of any type, because it's very hard. Again, with the best hosting, you could have the best virtual private server with the static solid state hard drive and all that, and your load speed in Australia is going to be 5 seconds. That's just how it is. But if you have AMP, it can be 2.1 seconds, which is under the 2.4 second threshold where people start dropping off, if you get my drift here. So if you do run heavy international campaigns, I highly recommend you use AMP for your PPC campaigns because you will get lower or higher quality scores, you will get higher conversion rates, and you will make more money from that traffic. If your website loads slower than 2.4 seconds or 2.4 seconds or greater domestically or in your country or in the US, then you would use AMP as well. Or in general, a decent hosting account will get you under 2.4 seconds anyway. So for domestic purposes, I find a lot less use in AMP because in general, good hosting will pretty much get you to that 2.4 seconds or less naturally anyway. And even if you use if you're not using your own hosting and you're using Unbounce, which is a tool that I talk about all the time on this channel, I use Unbounce most client campaigns. The load speed on Unbounce will be about 2 seconds anyway. So using AMP, in other words, there's really no reason for it. It loads fast on desktop and mobile. Under the 2.4 seconds, you don't have to worry about it. On a responsive, which Unbounce lets you have a responsive design. So they load, under that, base about 2 seconds either way, as long as the page isn't like super huge or anything, which we don't do that anyway. On Shopify, it's the same thing. You can get under a 2 second load time on Shopify domestically just by using Shopify. So you don't need to have upgraded hosting. Long story short, you're probably not going to be in a situation where your website will load under 2.4 seconds if you use a high-end website company that hosts your website, like the Shopify or Unbounce or ClickFunnels also loads about 2 seconds. You start getting into the sketchier, website builders or whatever, then that's the time. Then an AMP can help you. But the flip side with that, the other lesser known website builders usually don't have AMP compatibility, so you couldn't use it anyway. So if I had a website now and I wasn't using Unbounce or Shopify or ClickFunnels or anything like that, I host my own website, I could go to an Unbounce or a Shopify to run my PPC traffic to, or I could use the AMP to get my load speeds down. You really have a couple options there, respectively. For landing pages, if you're going to get into it, and PPC, if you're going to get into it heavily, I would recommend a landing page tool because I mentioned on this video, a lot of times people make changes on their main site, which then break the landing pages, the tracking may break, and you don't want your campaigns to be down for an hour or a minute once your PPC campaigns are scaled up and you're spending 5 figures a month on PPC ads. Those things got to be isolated and it's got to be rock solid. I don't want anybody making changes on my main site affecting those landing pages. Plus, it's easier to make copies of landing pages because there's no programming involved. So you don't have to get a programmer involved every time you make a new landing page. It's the other reason why I use an Unbounce. And anymore, for e-commerce, Shopify is what most people should go with because it's the most reliable and all that. If you get to where you're making 10 million a year or more in sales, you can do a fully custom. That's actually better, mainly because you can customize the shopping cart exactly what will get the most conversion rates with trust symbols and all that. I've talked about that in other videos. And getting off of topic here a little bit. So just wanted to let you know what your other options are to get the load speed down. It doesn't have to just be AMP. That's just one option. It's an option that's free. but you should at least still know what the other directions you can go. If you're sitting at the 3.5 second load speed, what you should do. Should I just switch to having a website built in a different platform, or should I use AMP? And then, of course, the answer, should you use AMP or should you not use AMP? Or can it help you? Are you in a situation where it can help you or not help you? Hope you enjoyed this video. I have a lot of other videos like this on this channel with other money-making PPC strategies on it. You should check those out. If you haven't seen any of my other videos yet, I'm sure you'll appreciate those. I have a blog at guaranteeppc.com/blog with step-by-step instructions on how to build campaigns the way that I build them for our clients here to guarantee the results. If you want stuff, explained to you on a more step-by-step basis, I have it there for you to look at as well if you're interested in that. If you have any questions about anything I covered today about AMP and PPC, as much as or outside of what I described already, you can leave me a comment down below. I get back to every single person who leaves me a comment on this channel, typically within a day or two time. And apart from that as well, I have another great video coming out in another few days. It'll teach you a little bit more how to get a little bit more out of your PPC campaigns. I hope to see you there as well. Take care.